As a guest, but every time I come to the conference, I suspect that you might be having a room somewhere. See, when he was introduced as a guest, but that's a great for another day. Also greet the leadership of your branch, led in front here by your branch chair. Secretary, with the leadership of other Pillay structures, SASCO and the YCL, I saw that there was no one was speaking for Suk. Let's hope that it stays that way even when we go through the SLC elections. And that we don't have the challenge that when you approach the elections, suddenly you have people who will be speaking for Suk. But when you have programs of the Pillay, there's no one who's there to speak for Suk. When I arrived here, I was told that we were late. I think what the secretary meant was that I was just late to see Comrade say. Because when I arrived here, I did not see the agency that was portrayed to me. Most of the comrades were coming in front, Comrade Rachid, were introducing themselves. And I found it confusing that I thought these comrades would be knowing each other right now. But especially the ones from the Pillay structure, South Carolina, they were introducing themselves to these comrades. So I thought maybe Wajana Basawana. Comrades, we are not going to be very long because unfortunately we are pressed for time. There are other engagements that we need to attend to. But that does not mean that we will not do justice to the subject that is before us. We were very happy that the ANC League did not decide to use this holiday to do what students will do when they are not in class and doing what students do when they are not in class, and rather organize this very important program so that we are able to understand why we are observing this day of Freedom Day. And we forgive you, comrades, because I heard that your membership induction was supposed to be yesterday. but I think it was rearranged for some time next week. So we'll forgive you for inviting Comrade Chair, Comrade Bachidi, to deliver a message of support on behalf of the ANC in an ANC youth program. So essentially he was supporting himself. He needed to deliver a message of support to support himself in a program of himself. So we'll forgive you because I know you are not yet in that chat. That's the message. So you are forgiven. Comrades, what is important whenever you deal with any subject is to be able to trace the historical context. Now, we have a history of oppression and a history of racial segregation, which is the main reason why this movement called the African National Congress was formed in 1912, to respond to the challenges of the time of racial oppression and segregation, and to organize those who are oppressed to fight for their own freedom. That's why the ANC, when it was formed, it was called the Parliament of the People, because it was meant to organize and mobilize those who are oppressed to fight for their own freedom. That is more than 100 years ago. Now, what it then meant was that the ANC had to come up with programs and campaigns to respond to those challenges of that time. Essentially, the ANC during its early days of formation, what it was fighting for was the right to universal suffrage, the right for one man, one vote in a democratic country. Because at that time, in the early 1900s, black people in general and Africans in particular were not allowed to vote. Were not allowed to participate in elections. And that is why the ANC came up with what we call moderate forms of protest against what they believed was an injustice against those who were the majority, democratically speaking, in this country. They would go to the colonial master, because at that time, South Africa was a colony of Great Britain. They would write deputations, they would write representations to request the Queen of Britain to allow South Africa to have universal suffrage, meaning to allow South Africa to have a situation where those who are black and Africans were allowed to vote. So those were modern forms of protesting against the injustices of the time. Fast forward to the early 40s, those forms of protest proved to be insignificant to change the South African situation. So a group of young comrades organized for the formation of the ANC. We speak about Sisulu, Matambo, Nelson Mandela, etc. When the ANC was formed, one of its main objectives was to radicalize the way the ANC was fighting the system of oppression in the country. And they were given further impetus when the National Party won elections in 1948. Elections where black people did not participate, and formally introduced the system of apartheid in 1948. So the following year, in 1949, the ANC came up with what we call the Program of Action. The Program of Action that was meant to ensure that the ANC came up with more radical programs and campaigns to fight the system of racial segregation. As a result, in the 1950s, you had a lot of significant events that came to shape South Africa as we know it today. You had the 1952 Defiance Campaign, led by Nelson Mandela himself. You had the 1955 adoption of the Freedom Charter, among other key events. So those were a product of the ANC Youth League, giving impetus and radicalizing the ANC's fight against oppression and racial segregation. Now, fast forward to the late 1980s, the early 1990s. I'm not going to speak about the whole history complex. I'm just going to speak about issues that are relevant for today. Or before I even get there, I should mention that the ANC was banned in the 60s, together with all other liberation movements as well, and was forced into exile. And they had to fight the system from exile. But in the late 60s, when we had the Morogoro Conference, the ANC came up with pillars beyond exile that would support the liberation struggle. You had your armed struggle, you had your international work, you had your underground work, among the key pillars of the struggle against apartheid. So, in the early 90s, or in 1990 to be exact, the ANC and other liberation movements were unbanned, and Nelson Mandela was released from prison. And the armed struggle was later suspended in the early 1990s. Now, when the ANC and liberation movements were unbanned and freedom fighters were released from prison and were allowed to come back into the country, those were in exile, the ANC entered into negotiations, which then gave rise to the 1994 elections on 27 April. Now, I'm just taking you briefly through what that is so that you understand that there were decades of struggle that led to that 1994 movement, where for the first time in history, we had universal suffrage, meaning that everyone who was within the borders of South Africa over the age of 18 was allowed to vote, regardless of their race, regardless of their skin color. And the ANC, as a result, won those elections. So that is why we commemorate this date. We are commemorating this date because in 1994, this country ushered a democratic dispensation. This country, for the first time, was able to establish a democratic system of governance. That is why the SACP would call that movement as the democratic breakthrough. We call it a democratic breakthrough because it only allowed us to cross the bridge into the other side. It did not mean that all the objectives of the goals of the liberation struggle were achieved. It merely created the conditions under democratic dispensation where some of the objectives of the liberation struggle could be achieved. It laid the foundation, it laid a conducive environment for us to pursue our goals because now the system of racial segregation was defeated. Then the question comes, why do we then call it Freedom Day? Why say literally Democracy Day? Because 1994 simply meant the achievement of democracy. Because the debate is that if you say it's Freedom Day, are you saying you are free? And free from what? I heard someone speak about free education. Yet, you still have students who struggle to access higher education because of what they don't have in their pockets.
Correct.
Sometimes there was Times Square. Now today I wanted class, there are no classes today, we're shutting down the campus, crying about issues of financial aid to students. You see, you need to understand what was the ultimate goal of the liberation struggle for you to understand the concept of freedom and whether it has been achieved or not. The objectives of the liberation struggle was to create a society that is antithetical to apartheid society. In other words, we wanted to create a society which, through the mirror, was an opposite of apartheid society. But beyond that, beyond creating that antithetical society, we wanted to create a society which, even qualitatively, is better than that society under apartheid. And the question then comes, have we created that society? When you look at the question of land and ownership and control of land, have we created a society in terms of the ownership and control of land that is antithetical to apartheid society? When you look at the ownership and control of the commanding heights of the South African economy, have we created that society that is antithetical to apartheid society? When you look at higher education, where you find yourselves now, have we created a society that is antithetical to apartheid society? Because historically, we had what we call historically black universities, historically disadvantaged institutions, which were the reserve of people in general and Africans in particular, such as this university, such as the University of Zululand, such as the University of London, the University of Fort Hare. Then you had the Ivory Towers, which were the reserve of white students. The University of Pretoria, the University of Witwatersrand, the University of Stellenbosch, the University of Cape Town. Have we created or transformed our higher education system where these institutions that were historically disadvantaged are able to reach the standard of those that were historically advantaged? Why is it that if you go to the University of Stellenbosch, you will find that probably the majority of students are whites, to be more specific, Africans-speaking white students. When you come to the University of Limpopo, you can walk the whole day. You will never see a student who's not like you, Rachid. You can walk through all the corners of this university. So, those are the realities of today, 30 years of democracy, right? So that is why we are saying, has freedom been attained? Now, this does not say, therefore, Rachid, that nothing has been done in the last 30 years. It doesn't say that. Anyone who can say, no, nothing has been achieved, nothing at all, nothing, this is failed, would be lying. There has been progress. The ANC has registered a lot of achievements. That is the reality, yes. But the essential point is that it's not yet over. Therefore, our future continue. That is the point. We are not saying nothing has been done. We are saying, yes, a lot has been done. we as the youth league must say yes, a lot has been done and defend the achievements that have been registered under the ANC-led government. But we must be the ones to say it's not yet good. And as we look into the future as young people, the future that we want to build, we're saying that we will continue and we want to build a better future where this freedom that we talk about can be achieved. Totally. Now, last month we were celebrating Human Rights Day. And there are people who sometimes will say, no, a lot has been achieved because of rights. We need to appreciate the fact that rights or human rights are not freedoms. The rights in the Constitution are not freedoms. A right is given. We give you a right. The right to vote, a right to freedom of expression, then you insult people. Yes, we can give you rights that in the Constitution they were given to you. But a freedom cannot be given. A freedom is taken, not given. When you look at history, there is no society or nation in the world that was ever given freedom. That is why Palestinians are fighting against the Israeli apartheid regime. Because they are fighting for freedom. Israel will never give them that freedom. Freedom is fought for, and it is taken by force, sometimes by guns, sometimes by Biden. But freedom is not given, it is taken. So we need to appreciate these things. Where people will say to us, no, you're free, you have rights. A person who's not free cannot exercise their right. When you look at the rule of law in this country, it testifies that if you are not free, you cannot access your right. When you look at the rule of law in this country. Because the rule of law of South Africa is the rule of law that we inherited from our colonial and apartheid East. And we have not transformed it to what we wanted to do. So, yes, we'll continue to commemorate, not celebrate Freedom Day. But we must do so with an appreciation of the historical context and with an appreciation of what this day really means to us. We are not saying we're going to say to the government, change this day to Democracy Day or change it to mean something else. We are just saying, as members of the ANC League, it is our role to ensure that we grapple with these things. It is our role to ensure that we organize and mobilize young people, to ensure that what is not being achieved, it can be pursued by us as the ANC League. Because if you are not organized, you will not be able to mobilize students or young people. You must first be organized yourselves, have a strong financial ANC and then be able to do the work of the ANC through that coalition. So, comrades, in short, and on our several revelations for now today, we did say that we will not be very long with now. But whenever we speak, we always emphasize that the discussion does not end when we leave that door, because political education is a continuous process and it takes place anywhere, and it can take place between anybody. Even if you are two people, you can engage in political education. So we want to appreciate that you organize this program so that we can remind ourselves of what this day means, where we come from, and where we wish to go. And thank you very much for your attention. Amanda.
Away.
Away.
Amanda.